you for joining us. I'm Vanessa Granado.
And I'm Tiana Xavier. Tonight we will be tracking local, state, and of course the presidential election. We will give you at home the latest numbers as results come into our newsroom. Viewers will be able to track the electoral votes through the graphic in the corner of the screen. All information shared is collected from the Siena College Research Institute, Associated Press, and Times-Union.
And throughout our broadcast, we will have a panel of experts to discuss multiple topics in relation to the presidential election. We'll start with the presidential race. Here is where the race for the White House stands right now.
Trump is leading 188 to Harris 99 electoral votes. So far, New York, Vermont, Delaware, New York, Illinois, and a few other states have gone blue, while Texas, Florida, and many southern states have gone red. We still have the West Coast, Alaska, and Hawaii to be called. And all eyes right now are on key battleground states.
The latest polling from the Siena College Research Institute has it neck and neck. In Arizona, Trump has a 4-point lead over Harris. In Georgia, Harris has a 1-point lead over Trump. In North Carolina, Harris leads Trump by 2 points. In Nevada, Harris leads Trump by 3 points. In Wisconsin, Harris leads Trump by 2 points. And in Michigan and Pennsylvania, the candidates are tied. Nationally, the race for the White House is a toss-up. This race could come down to those key battleground states. And just a reminder, while polls have closed in New York and many other states, there are still a few states that have their polls open. California, Idaho, and Washington will close at 11 p.m., Hawaii will close at 12 a.m., and Alaska will close at 1 a.m.
Donald Trump has already won Florida, where his campaign watch party is happening right now. SCTV's Michael Yoshida kicks off coverage from Palm Beach.
We're into the final hours of voting this election day here at Trump headquarters at the Palm Beach Convention Center. Music starting to play. Several hundred of the supporters of the former president starting to file in. We expect several thousand to be here by the later part of the evening. It's been a busy day across the country as tens of millions of voters have hit the polls to cast their ballots. We've seen long lines at polling centers across many of the battleground states, the Blue Wall, to some of the Sun Belt battleground states as well. Also seen the candidates out and about. We saw earlier today former President Donald Trump cast his own ballot, then visit one of his headquarters here in West Palm, speaking with his staffers, with supporters, getting some cheers as he talked about his campaign, about their focus, the big push to make sure they get the turnout high on this election day. Also saw Vice President Kamala Harris making some appearances on radio stations, also speaking with her staffers and supporters at the DNC headquarters in D.C., also making some calls, talking with voters as both campaigns focusing on the turnout this election day. We heard from both candidates. Here's what they had to say.
Regrets. You always have regrets. I can't think of any, to be honest, to use her expression. I can't think of any. Look, I ran a great campaign. I think it was maybe the best of the three. We did great in the first one. We did much better in the second one, but something happened. And this was the best. I would say this was the best campaign.
We all have so much more in common than what separates us. And we rise and fall together. And when we love our country and show our expression of our love of country, it has to include understanding the connection we all have and working toward our common goals, regardless of who you voted for.
And the Harris campaign will be holding a watch party at the vice president's alma mater, Howard University in D.C. As for former President Trump, he will be spending most of the evening at Mar-a-Lago with close family and friends. We're told he is planning at some point to come over here to the convention center, deliver a speech to his supporters, even if we don't know the official outcome of the election. As for when that could happen, his campaign saying that is not known. A lot to watch as those polls are starting to close. Reporting at Trump headquarters at the Palm Beach Convention Center, I'm Michael Yoshida.
While Donald Trump watches the results pour in from Florida, Vice President Kamala Harris and her team are watching from D.C.
SCTV's Brian Abel joins us from the Harris campaign headquarters at Howard University.
Here at Harris election headquarters tonight, things are starting to get going. Supporters of the vice president starting to filter into the yard here. One of her favorite places at Howard University. This, of course, a near and dear place to the vice president's heart. This is her alma mater, where she was a freshman 42 years ago, also where she had her first campaign for freshman class representatives. So if she were to give a victory speech here tonight, that would be quite the full circle moment, she says, for her. Her campaign is looking to some of the states, the battleground ones of the South, that will be closing their polls earlier than some of the other battleground states in the Midwest. We are talking about Georgia and North Carolina specifically. If she were to pick up one of those two states, it makes her path to 270 a little bit easier. But if she were to not get either, then she has to look to the blue wall and hope that that holds steady all the way through a clear sweep of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. That is her easiest path. And if the former President Trump, if he were to get all of Georgia and North Carolina, that makes his path easier. But if he loses either one, then he's looking to the blue wall, hopefully to flip one of those three states as well. Here is what the campaigns were saying earlier tonight before the results start coming in.
It's going to take some time to get results. We're going to go up, down, but at the end of the day, as we always do, we will get the results that we know are accurate.
She always have regrets. I can't think of any, to be honest, to use her expression. I can't think of any. Look, I ran a great campaign. I think it was maybe the best of the three.
A pivotal moment in American history, and the Harris campaign is stressing patience, knowing that the results of this election may not come in tonight. At Howard University, I'm Brian Abel reporting.
As votes are starting to be counted, the Department of Justice has been sending election monitors to 86 counties across 26 states due to fears of improper partisan influence and voter suppression.
All 7 of the biggest contested swing states are on the DOJ's list, along with a mix of red and blue states. Some red states have pushed back on the DOJ, with Florida and Missouri saying that the election monitors will not be allowed access to voting locations in their state. Government officials have been going to polling locations since 1965 to make sure vulnerable populations have access to voting and to prevent unlawful election interference.
Now let's take a look at some of the races we have our eyes on. We'll start with the local race for governor. Vermont Governor Phil Scott has won against Democrat challenger Esther Charleston. Scott has held this seat since 2017. Charleston defeated Democrat Peter Duval with over 70% of the votes. Charleston served on the Middlebury Select Board, and she co-chairs Vermont's Commission on Women. Along with other major races, we're keeping our eye on Senate races as there are 34 seats up for grabs.
Currently, Republicans hold the majority in the House, but Democrats are in control of the Senate. The results of these races could affect the Senate's balance for power, as both parties are attempting to claim the majority win. One of these Senate seats is right here in New York. Democratic nominee Kirsten Gillibrand won 66% over Republican nominee Mike Sapercone. Gillibrand has held office since 2009. Sapercone is a former New York police detective challenging Gillibrand for the seat. The latest polling from the Siena College Research Institute on this race has Gillibrand leading.
Another Senate race is in Massachusetts. Incumbent Democrat Elizabeth Warren has won against John Deaton, a trial attorney running for the first time. Warren has held this seat since 2013. Deaton won the Republican nomination for 64% of the vote back in September.
And back in Vermont, State Senator Bernie Sanders has won again. Sanders has held this seat since 2007. The incumbent Sanders was running against the Republican nominee Gerald Malloy, won the Republican primary while also running unopposed. Moving on to the House of Representatives, all 435 seats are up for election this year.
With every seat available, both parties are vying for control. These results can share the legislative agenda for the next 4 years. One of the tightest races for the House of Representatives is actually here in our area.
Josh Riley looks to defeat the incumbent of District 19, Marcus Molinaro. And last time these two faced, it was neck and neck. 2 years back in the race for the district, the incumbent Republican bested the Democrat Riley by just under 2 points. Riley, a former lawyer, will look to put another seat in Congress for the Democrats, while Molinaro tries to defend his spot for the Republican Party. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries both campaigned for New York 19 last week.
I have been to Mark's district probably more than any, and there's a reason for that. He is one of the most important members in the United States House of Representatives, one of the most effective members that I think has served in the modern era, And he's one of my favorite people because the thing about Mark is the skill set he brings to the job is unmatched.
No one can point to a single thing that Johnson's opponent or that this extreme MAGA Republican majority has done to make life better for you, for people in the Southern Tier, for the people of New York, or for the people of this great nation. Can't point to a single thing.
Over 180,000 New Yorkers voted in this matchup in 2022. Molinaro won by under 5,000 votes.
In New York's 20th congressional district, incumbent Paul Tonko has won once again over Republican Kevin Waltz. After both of the primary elections were canceled, Tonko and Waltz advanced to the general election. Tonko has been in the seat since 2013. This is Waltz's first try to unseat Tonko in the New York's 20th congressional district.
In northern New York, District 21 incumbent Republican Elise Stefanik faces off against Democratic nominee Paula Collins. Stefanik has been in office for almost a decade, while Collins, a former special education teacher, has been a cannabis tax attorney for, quote, small to mid-sized entrepreneurs for the past 4 years. Currently, Stefanik is projected to win and continue her incumbency.
Now for Massachusetts' 1st district seat in the House. It's independent Nadia Milleron against incumbent Democrat Richard Neal without a Republican candidate. The independent Milleron is the main challenger in the 1st district. Milleron's platform is impacted by the loss of her daughter after a Boeing plane crash in 2019. Milleron's plan to focus on corporate reform without partisan influence. Milleron looks to unseat Neal, who has held this seat in Congress since 1989, when the 1st district was the 2nd district.
Heading back to Vermont, incumbent Becca Balint won over Republican nominee Mark Kirster. Balint began her career in public service as a member of the Vermont State Senate. She was the first openly gay individual and first woman to hold this position. In 2022, Kirster ran for a U.S. Senate seat in Vermont as an independent, but was unable to win the seat. Coming up in our next half hour, we'll take a look at all the local races for state Senate and state assembly. For many students on campus, this is the first time they have the chance to vote in a presidential election.
Photojournalist Jake Salvi spoke to some students on campus to ask their thoughts on this year's election.
If Kamala Harris wins the presidency on, Tuesday now, she'll run things very similar to how the current administration is doing things. I think there might be some economic reforms. We'll see Goldman Sachs release some papers on that. I think it will be very similar to what's going on right now.
I think it'll be very similar to the Biden presidency, though I think she's kind of more hardline on student debt relief, less supportive of Israel. But her and Biden have very similar platforms with kind of more left-wing, anti-free trade, sort of similar to Trump, but I think it'll be largely a continuation of the Biden presidency.
Well, I think it certainly has its drawbacks, but it also has its advantages. I think Kamala Harris overall, socially, she's like more, I would say, empathetic to the people. So yeah, that's definitely an advantage of having her in office.
With Trump as president, I think we'll see some familiar faces in the cabinet. I think economics-wise, we might see some change there. But again, it's hard to say because the platforms are lacking.
Well, I think that he's more of like foreign affairs. I think he's better in foreign affairs. I think he was more consistent in like what he believed in, like, and how he handled certain situations.
I think there'll be a lot of changes. I think it'll be instability. And I think he'll attack the bureaucracy a lot and ally himself with people like Elon Musk, sort of attacking kind of government bloat or whatever he considers government bloat.
Right now we have a lot of problems going on in the world, and so there's both sides have different ways of dealing with things, and they might be right, they might be wrong ways, but it's just with what's going on in the world, I think it's a little challenging for both sides on how they're going to handle it.
It's been a very lopsided election year. I mean, with Biden dropping out and Trump having all those incidences with his rallies and stuff, and just all the buildup that has happened since then, with COVID and wars going on. Definitely, I don't know. I just feel like that in general, the 2020s have been a rough decade. Heck, I'd say probably even like the years before that have been rough.
I will be voting.
I voted last week.
To be honest with you, I'm thinking of writing in on my ballot.
I I will be. I think I will because I have.
I already have.
When we come back, we will take you to our election panel hosted by SCTV's own Amber Fisher.
Amber will be joined by Albany County legislator Paul Bergdorf, Deputy Director of State Strategies at All in Action Fund Dan Mosier, and from the Siena College Political Science and International Relations Department, Dr. Sam Call. Don't go anywhere, we'll be right back.
Welcome back. This year's presidential race is a major historical event. SCTV has brought together a panel of experts to talk about the candidates and the election results as they come in. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Paul Bergdorf, an Albany County legislator who represents the 23rd District of New York. The 23rd District encompasses much of Colony, including Latham and where we are currently, Loudonville. Paul graduated from the University of Albany and was first elected to the legislature in 2015. He was the first Republican chairman of the legislature's Public Works Committee, and he is passionate about public safety, taxpayer dollars, and accountability in county government. Next, we welcome Dr. Sam Call. She is a visiting assistant professor of political science and international relations here at Siena after teaching at St. John Fisher and Syracuse University. She received her PhD in political science from Syracuse University. She has been published in several political journals and has spoken about democracy in various conferences. And lastly, we are joined by Dan Mosier. He is the Deputy Director of State Strategies at All in Action Fund, a reproductive justice organization fighting to ensure abortion care is affordable, available, and supported for anyone who needs it. Dan previously worked as the Chief of Staff to New York State Senator Brian Kavanaugh, where he ran legislative and community affairs operations on behalf of over 320,000 constituents in Lower Manhattan. Thank you all for making the time to be with us this evening. The topic I would like to start with is at the front of many voters' minds. According to the Siena College Research Institute's polls, the economy is the #1 issue for voters. Former President Trump, according to those polls, is more trusted by voters to handle the economy. Recently, Vice President Harris has begun to close that gap, with 52% of respondents saying that they trust Trump more to lead the economy, compared to 45% for Harris as of late October. Dr. Call, I'd like to start with you. Can you tell me why voters seem to trust the former president more on the economy?
I think this is a larger trend in American politics where the Republican Party is seen as being kind of the financial party, while the Democratic Party is the one for all of your social programs that you might care for. And so we've seen this evolve over time, not just in this election, but that has seemed to be a trend in previous elections as well. I believe that in 2020, Trump was also seen as being the preferred candidate for the economy, but we continuously see people preferring different options like this in every single election. And so I think this goes quite along with what we've been seeing, especially since the Great Recession. I've been teaching about the Great Recession in 2008 with my class. There's a lot of different grievances that came out of that, obviously. And so people still have those concerns about the economy, so it makes sense that that is still on the top of people's minds.
Absolutely. And Dan, I'd like to turn it to you. Many voters have said that they do not trust President Harris on the economy purely because of the policies of the Biden administration. How will the vice president's economic plan differ from the president's?
Yeah, I think there are key differences. I think what's important to note is that this truncated 100-day campaign that the vice president has been on has eroded former President Trump's support on the economy. I think over President Biden it was about 35 points, and as you mentioned, brought that down to about 4. So, that takes a lot of good campaigning, and that takes clear economic policies. And some ways that are different would be especially on her policies on housing, pledging to create 3 million new housing units, pledging to take on corporate landlords that are buying up single-family homes or buying up multi-unit apartment buildings, and using algorithm rent-setting software that fixes prices throughout the industry, which makes rents higher for everyone. So there are key issues. Obviously, the child tax credit, restoring the child tax credit has been a key plank of the vice president's campaign. The Biden administration did do that in the American Rescue Plan. Unfortunately, it was only temporary. But when that happened, we saw childhood poverty cut in half. And so, I think a lot of the sentiments that we've seen in the country are a response to what we saw in the pandemic, which was super high inflation across the world. But what we also have seen in the Biden administration is a faster and stronger recovery than any of the other G10 nations out there. And that hasn't fully broken through for a number of reasons. But I think the vice president has done a great job closing that gap and making clear what portions of the economy, what portions of the platform that she would change.
Absolutely. And Paul, I'd like to turn to you and ask, according to CNN, the former president does plan to impose a universal tariff on imports to the U.S. He also plans to create tax cuts for individuals and for corporations, and says he'll cut energy costs. But he does not support widespread student loan forgiveness and has vowed to protect Social Security and Medicare. What effects will the former president's plans have on the economy?
Well, I think the most important thing, this is the first time we've had a direct contrast between a former president who had an economic program and a set of economic metrics, whether it be the inflation rate, whether it be mortgage rates, whether it would be increases in gross income and actual income for virtually every ethnic group. More people were working, more people were, the income gap was shortening for the rich and the poor based on a universal economic growth model. And I think it goes back to what other presidential campaigns have had and used as a standard. Are you better off 4 years ago, or are you better off today? And I think Donald Trump's plans, he wants to take a very strong role for the American auto industry. He wants to curtail the mandatory pushing of everybody into an EV. That's going to maintain auto industry jobs. He wants to go back to some of the energy policies which made the United States a very strong economic oil exporter, so that China and Russia are not being able to, and Iran, make billions of dollars at the expense of money which would have come to the United States. The economy is largely driven on energy, food prices, housing materials, everything requires energy. And the difference was gas was $1.80 a gallon 4 years ago, and now it's over $3 a gallon, but it's been as high as $6 and $7 across the country. So I think what Donald Trump has done is he has said to people, in this instance, do you want to go back to the better economic circumstances that you had 4 years ago, before there was trillions of dollars in spending, a war on energy, uncontrolled migrant immigration? People are able to judge for the first time two administrations side by side.
Absolutely, and you brought up some great points that we are going to talk about in just a little while.
All right.
And when we come back, is voter fraud a concern? We'll tell you about some safeguards that are in place that help keep our elections safe and fair. We'll be right back. We have a news update on the presidential election right now.
Harris has won Colorado with 54% and also won the District of Columbia at 92%, while Trump has won Utah and Montana. Now, a local case of ballot fraud was resolved last week. On November 1st, a former Troy councilwoman was sentenced to a year of probation and was fined $1,500 2 years after pleading guilty to ballot fraud in the 2021 election.
Kimberly McPherson admitted to submitting absentee ballots through both the Working Families Party primary and general elections. U.S. District Judge May D'Agostino chose probation after reviewing the public figure's age and clean record. Judge D'Agostino also explained how McPherson's actions compromised the election's integrity. According to the Times-Union, there is a federal investigation into Rensselaer County officials for similar acts of misconduct. And in recent years, we've all heard the horror stories. Voting more than once, voting for relatives, even mail-in ballots being stolen or boxes being set on fire. Voter fraud does happen. Luckily, it is rare and there are safeguards in place to catch offenders. For in-person voting, most states require or request voters show some form of ID. Some places require you to state your name, address, sign a polling book, or sign an affidavit. Those who try to vote for a dead relative or for someone else run the risk of being caught when election officials update voter lists with death records and obituaries.
But what about mail-in voting, you might ask? Every state requires a signature for absentee voting. Many states check those signatures with past signatures and require the signature to be notarized or require a witness to sign. With that, a growing number of states have online ballot tracking tools to show voters when their ballot was sent, returned, and counted. These ballot fraud crimes can be punished with hefty fines and prison times. Non-U.S. citizens who have broken this election law can even be deported.
An Associated Press investigation into 6 battleground states disputed by former President Donald Trump showed there were fewer than 475 fraudulent ballots cast in 2020 in those states. That's out of millions of fair and legal ballots cast. Joe Biden won those 6 states by over 300,000 votes, not nearly enough to tip the outcome in any of those states. When we come back, we will return to our SCTV election panel.
Next up on our panel, we will be discussing both candidates running platforms only on SCTV.
A major part of Vice President Harris's platform is the protection of women's rights and health care, specifically since the overturning of Roe v. Wade. According to the Siena College Research Institute's September poll, 66% of voters say that they support abortion being legal, and the majority of voters say that Vice President Harris is better on reproductive rights. Vice President Harris has vowed to restore reproductive freedoms. Dan, with your experience in working towards reproductive rights, will she be able to accomplish this if she wins the election, especially if Congress is majority Republican?
If Congress is a majority Republican, it will clearly be a harder task, as we've seen the Republican Party has shown no regard to protecting women's right to choose and to ensure abortion access across this country. In fact, they've gone and done the opposite, restricted abortion access anywhere that they held power. So it will be harder for her to enact good abortion justice policies with a Republican Congress, but things that she can do. She can continue what President Biden started, which is putting forward an executive budget that didn't include the Hyde Amendment, which is the federal ban on providing funding through Medicare or through Medicaid or to cover abortions. She can continue that trend. And what she can do is stave off the consequences for abortion access that comes with a Donald Trump presidency. That includes invoking the Comstock Act, which would make the mailing of abortion pills like mifepristone, would make that illegal. That does not require an act of Congress. That can happen through enforcement of this 1800s law that's been on the books. So with a Republican Congress, it becomes infinitely harder to restore the protections of Roe v. Wade that existed for 50 some odd years. And again, I think we'll be seeing tonight in the first presidential election since the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe v. Wade, we'll be seeing people, not just women, but people come out and support abortion rights up and down the ballot. There are 10 states that have initiatives to enshrine abortion rights into their constitution. We have seen, I think, 3 or 4 of them already pass, even the one in New York, which is looking that it's passing at about 72% approval. The one thing that we've seen fail is the one in Florida, which got 57% of the vote, but because of their thresholds for passing ballot initiatives, didn't meet the 60% threshold. So even in Florida, which we'll see, go strong red for President Trump tonight, they reject the draconian 6-week abortion ban that has been put in their state. And we've seen this in every election since Dobbs. In the reddest states in the union, we have seen people come out and support abortion access. So yes, infinitely harder with a Republican Congress, infinitely harder to protect bodily autonomy and everyone's right to decide what they want to do with their own body under a Republican administration. But a Harris presidency could stem a lot of the worst impulses of the Republican Party.
Thank you. And Paul, I'd like to turn it to you and ask, according to CNN, the former president says that he would veto a national abortion ban if reelected. But he has also said that he would appoint Robert F. Kennedy to, quote, be in charge of women's health, end quote. And Mr. Kennedy has said that he would support a national abortion ban. Former President Trump has said he believes it should be up to the states to say if women can have the rights to an abortion, and takes credit for the overturning of Roe v. Wade. What do these conflicting stances mean for women's rights in the U.S.?
Well, to be honest with you, I'm a pro-choice Republican. And I find for the first time that our party platform no longer has a litmus test to be against abortion. And that's a direct result of Donald Trump recognizing reality and reallocating the decision on abortion to the 50 states. Now, some of the states, New York, abortion on demand, abortion to the day of birth, no problem. That's what the people of the state of New York, returning it to the voters, adopted. States like Florida, they went with what, six weeks? And now there's a bit of a revolt to that. So you know something? It's not so bad that the people in each state have a decision. I, as a Republican, I feel as though abortion was the third rail of politics for Republicans. But now, there is no inherent umbrella right protected by the Constitution. And if you believe constitutionalists who review the who make Supreme Court decisions, they felt that was the case. However, back to the states, New York, California, many states, and even Republican states are enshrining abortion protections. And that's democracy. That's about people voting. And so I think that's a good thing. And I think ultimately, as this levels out over time, each state will seek its own balance, and it will be a reflection of the people in that state voting democratically.
Paul, it's the third rail of politics because women are dying. These bans are killing women in these restrictive states. preventable deaths for common reproductive health care. And as a pro-choice Republican, I'm sure you understand how necessary that health care is to a person who's experiencing pregnancy loss. And these women have been dying because the Supreme Court decided that for the first time, this right, this federal right, actually isn't a federal right. It should be limited. And if you travel here, you actually have more rights than if you travel here. And the same doctrine that they used, another doctrine was endorsed that says, hey, you know, this privacy right that we based Roe on, you know, we also based gay marriage on. We also based the right to contraception on. We also based the right to interracial marriage on. And so if we're saying that there is no inherent privacy right in the Constitution, then that doesn't just take away Roe, but it opens challenges up to gay marriage, to interracial marriage, and to the right to contraception, because those are the same, they were founded on that same exact constitutional principle. And that could say, all right, send that back to the states. And then we're back in a place we were 10, 15 years ago, where people can't recognize their own marriages. Or now, again, people are dying because they can't get this care, because governments have stepped in and said, actually, we know better about what you should do with your body than you do. And that's just flat out wrong. It's un-American. And the fact, like you said, the people of Florida, to the tune of 57%, voted against this 6-week ban, but because they raised the thresholds to 60%, that doesn't pass. So you need, I guess, a 2/3 majority to revolt against the law that's killing people in your state now.
Well, actually, in Florida, it's 60%, but that's
right. And but they got 57%.
But that's the standard for all their
all of their ballot initiatives.
And those are very great points. But I would like to ask Dr. Call's professional opinion on the abortion rights either going to the states or as a federal government decision.
I think we touched on some really important things, including one contradiction in terms of the idea that we should be turning abortion rights back to the states, but we have also relied on an institution, the Supreme Court, that is an unelected body, to also make those decisions for large swaths of the population as well. So there are multiple aspects of this, but yes, I believe Dan is right. There are people that are genuinely being harmed by some of these 6-week bans, which is why we see so many of these challenges coming up. And I have especially seen women voters have been activated by a lot of these issues as well. We've seen a lot of the later breaking polls saying that women potentially are choosing later and choosing Harris for that reason, and for some of the other approaches to communication with women that the Trump campaign has done so far. So I think it's important to look at that nuance as well when we're looking at trying to send things back to the states, because we want it to be at the hands of the people. But then when we want to talk about the Supreme Court being in charge of that as well, a body that is not elected by the people, I'm not saying that that is either a moral bad or a normative good. I'm saying that those two things, we have to reckon how we feel about them when we're talking about abortion.
Absolutely.
Well,
Thank you.
I'd like to just jump in here for a second, because to question the Supreme Court, which is a co-equal branch of government, which is designed to sort out these issues, where the Congress and the executive department cannot come to terms, and it's been litigated, they are the mechanism that we have. So to question the judgment of the Supreme Court as an unelected body, you know, when it was not a Republican Supreme Court, there was no problem with Ruth Bader Ginsburg and her decisions at the time being in the majority. So, you know, it kind of swings both ways, obviously, but I have confidence in the Supreme Court, composed the way it's been over time, and we'll deal with that over time.
And as a scholar of democracy and constitutional democracy, I am well aware of the separation of powers and checks and balances in the government and why the Supreme Court is important. I'm not saying that the Supreme Court is completely invalid or is unimportant. I'm saying that when we were looking at the Supreme Court and you were looking at direct democracy, they are not the same thing. And so when we're talking about them in the same conversation, we should be careful about the way that we talk about that. I 100% believe in checks and balances and separation of powers, and that is not at all the direction that I was going with that.
Okay,
so.
thank you.
Thank you all. That was very insightful. And as we continue, we would like to, on SCTV, take a look at the latest race updates, followed by thoughtful accounts from more Siena College professors on this year's biggest issues. Stay tuned.
Election Night special coverage. I'm Vanessa Granado.
And I'm Tiana Xavier. Let's take a live look at Race 270.
Right now, Trump is leading at 210 and has just won Iowa, but Harris is still gaining ground with 113. Now let's take a look at some of the races in New York State, starting with the state Senate.
The 46th District of New York State is currently represented by Neil Breslin. However, Breslin is not running for re-election for this seat. Patricia Fahey will be representing the Democratic Party. She's had a seat in New York State Assembly District 109 since 2013. She will be running against Republican candidate Theodore Danz Jr. Both candidates were selected to advance to the general election after both of the Democratic and Republican primaries were canceled.
In the New York State Senate District 41, incumbent Michelle Hinchey is running against Republican nominee Patrick Sheehan. Hinchey held the chair for New York State Senate District 46 before taking the chair for District 41 in 2023. Patrick Sheehan won the Republican primary for Assembly District 103 2 years ago, but lost in the general election.
New York State Republican Senator Jake Ashby is seeking re-election in District 43, known for supporting veterans and local infrastructure. Ashby is challenged by Colony Town Councilman Alvin Gamble. Gamble is a lifelong Democrat and is running for District 43, for first time focusing on jobs, education, and family support.
In the New York State Senate District 44, incumbent Republican James Tedisco and Democratic nominee Manita Sanghvi lead the way for the seat. Tedesco has a long history in politics. He became a member of the New York State Assembly back in 1983. He served as the minority leader from 2005 to 2009. He has been a member of the New York State Senate since 2017. Songvi is running for the first time. She is a parent and educator at Skidmore College who is looking to challenge Tedesco for the seat.
And finally, at State Senate District 45, Republican State Senator Dan Steck has retained his seat. There was no Democratic challenger for this seat. Steck has served as state senator since 2021. Those were all the races for New York State Senator in the viewing area. Now let's move on to the New York State Assembly. Incumbent Republican Chris Tague is seeking re-election as the representative for New York's 102nd Assembly District, a position he has held since 2018.
Tague has won 4 elections in this largely rural district. He now faces a challenge from Democrat Janet Tweed, a physical therapist and local politician from Delhi. Tweed edged out challenger Mary Finneran in the June primary.
To the New York 106th Assembly, where incumbent Dee Barrett looks to hold her seat against Republican Stephen Krakauer. Barrett, who has served in the New York Assembly since 2012, is the chair of the Assembly's Energy Committee and has focused on issues regarding agriculture and environment. Krakauer is looking to be elected to the Assembly for the first time and has served as part of both the Town Board and Justice Court in Poughkeepsie.
In New York State Assembly District 107, Republican Scott Bendit currently holds the seat. He has held this position since 2023. He took over for Jake Ashby and then ran unopposed in 2022. Democratic nominee Chloe Pierce is running against the incumbent Bendit. Pierce bested Kent Sopris 9 points in the June primary.
In Assembly District 108, incumbent John McDonald has once again run unopposed and won. McDonald entered office in 2013 and has kept the position since. McDonald was chosen to run again by the Democratic Party, running unopposed for the 2nd election in a row.
Moving to Assembly District 109, Democrat Gabriela Romero won over Republican Alicia Purdy. Romero won a closely contested primary back in June against 6 other Democratic nominees, while Purdy was looking to represent District 109 after losing in 2022.
In District 110, incumbent Phil Steck is on the ballot against Republican Jeffrey Madden. Steck has held this seat for over a decade, taking over for Jim Tedesco in 2013. Jeffrey Madden is a Colony native that received the nomination for this office after Republican primaries were canceled in June. District 110 includes Loudonville, which is Siena College's hometown.
Angelo Santa Barbara looks to retain his assembly spot as the incumbent for District 111. In order to do so, he'll have to go through Joe Mastriani. This is a rematch of the 2022 election where Santa Barbara won by over 10 points. The incumbent Santa Barbara has held this seat for over a decade, while Mastriani has come under fire in recent weeks. Mastriani was alleged to have stolen campaign mail from a Scotia residence. A formal complaint was filed with Scotia Police.
Moving into District 112, Democrat Joe Seaman looks to unseat incumbent Mary Beth Walsh. Walsh has been held in this seat since 2017, taking over after Jim Tedesco gave up his seat. This is a rematch over the 2020 election for District 112. Mary Beth Walsh won over 15 points.
In New York Assembly District 113, Democratic incumbent Carrie Werner is running against Republican candidate Jeremy Messina. Both candidates were selected to represent their respective parties after both primaries were canceled. Werner has held the seat since 2015.
In New York State Assembly District 114, incumbent Matthew Simpson is running unopposed. After the primaries were canceled, Simpson advanced alone to the general election. This isn't the first time Simpson has run unopposed, as he did the same in 2022. Earlier, we had heard from students on campus about the race to 70.
Photojournalist Chris Hicks spoke to some Siena College professors to learn what a Harris presidency may look like compared to Trump's second run in the White House.
So if Kamala wins, I think, one, in terms of policy, you're going to see a continuation of Biden administration policies. So, things like we'll continue to support Ukraine with humanitarian aid and military aid, continue to support Israel while pushing them towards a peace agreement as soon as possible. You're going to see her pushing things like green jobs and education policies, like loan forgiveness that the Biden administration is pushing.
We can fully expect that there's going to be some major pushback from members of the Congress majority in both houses
to any proposals that Kamala Harris, as President of the United States, brings forward for their consideration.
I think America will be much better under a Harris presidency than a Trump presidency. As an economist, a lot of her policies are focused on improving the lives and job prospects of middle-class workers.
They have very different views of the function of the presidency. So Kamala Harris has stated explicitly that she would follow the norms and institutions and the Constitution in terms of the U.S., even to the extent of appointing a Republican to her cabinet. Donald Trump, on the other hand, has a different view of presidential and executive power, and so that vision of the country is much more nationalist, much more top-heavy, kind of a little bit of tension with the Constitution and the division of powers.
The things he's promised to do, like attack political opponents, sort of encourage censorship of the media, and bring sort of the force of the federal government to apply towards his policy, likely would lead to a Democratic decline.
Given the highly partisan, divided nature of our political system, you can fully expect that President Trump is going to face opposition to a series of his initiatives.
His tariff policy will very much increase inflation by imposing taxes on a lot of imported goods, and that'll raise the cost of living and pinch American consumers in the pocketbook. And with inflation being a major issue now, what I think a lot of people don't realize is that a Trump presidency will lead to even higher inflation.
Coming up on SCTV, our panel dives into former President Trump's platform. We'll be right back.
thanks for joining us. A part of former President Trump's platform is his vow to stop illegal immigration. He pledges to deport millions of people and says it will be the largest deportation plan in history. He also says he will use the National Guard to arrest illegal immigrants and wants to end birthright citizenship. Paul, I'd like to ask, how will these policies affect communities nationwide when statistically 5% of U.S. homes have one or more occupants that are not U.S. citizens?
Well, I think it all depends on how the non-U.S. citizen came into this country, whether they came in legally through the ports of entry or whether or not they streamed by the tens of thousands across a border that was not supposed to be open to them. And I have traveled all across the world, and there is virtually no country that does not have borders. And the ones that have gone through in Europe now with unlimited immigration are now springing back the other way to protect their borders and to protect their economies. There was a headline last week in one of our daily circulation newspapers about the, I think it was $18 billion that has been spent in New York State on migrant populations that have been shipped to New York or have come to New York. And we've seen it here in the town of Colony. My district has Wolf Road. Last Memorial Day weekend, all of a sudden, without any notice, New York City shipped 210 illegal immigrants that they welcomed as a sanctuary city, and they sent them to Colony. And without exception, every immigrant family that had children, they shipped to the Sure Stay, and all those children were educated at the cost of the North Colony school taxpayers. So every immigrant child that came to Albany County was paid for, their education was paid for by the school taxpayers and property owners of North Colony, not even the whole town, but the whole concentration. So when they talk about every town becoming a border town, this is unsustainable. You cannot allow 2 million people to walk across your border. People like to criticize, great talking point for the Democrats is, well, Trump wouldn't allow the bipartisan bill to pass. Well, what nobody likes to remember is the bipartisan bill said you could have up to 5,000 people a day walk across your border, and that's 1,850,000 people per year. And they said no. The entire Republican Senate and the entire Republican House said no, we're not going to institutionalize or normalize 2 million people walking across the border. What that bill, for the most part, did was fund more judges to process people across the border. It did not do anything to limit people coming across the border. So there will be, under a Trump administration, there will be a response to shutting down the border, making it like it was when Trump was president, remain in Mexico, legal immigration, and there will be some matter of relief for cities and municipalities across this country that local taxpayers are having to pick up this burden.
Thank you. And Dr. Call, I'd like to ask your professional opinion on the former president's immigration plan.
I think that this plays into a larger trend that we're seeing globally of populist leaders specifically focusing on issues like immigration. And we aren't seeing unprecedented numbers of migrants. There have been similar levels of migration when you look at actual percentages of population that have been foreign-born or that have come in from foreign countries. So this isn't something that the United States hasn't ever dealt with before in the past. So this is not something that is brand new to politicians of both parties. And I do think that the immigration policy that Trump has put forward has addressed a lot of those kinds of concerns that have been evoked by this kind of threat framing that we have in the media specifically and through politicians of having migrants as the other, as the threat in the situation, and therefore being needed to protect American citizens. So this is something that political science literature has been looking at. And Donald Trump's policies, while they are a bit more extreme than many of the other populists that are also doing the same thing, it's within the realm of what other populist leaders are doing globally.
Thank you. And Dan, Vice President Harris specifically has put emphasis on ways that she would enforce border security and how she would crack down on drug smuggling. She's also put her support behind comprehensive immigration reform, but has not spoken on if she would continue the Biden administration's programs that have allowed more than 1 million migrants into the country. How would her presidency differ from the Biden administration, and how will that impact immigration into the U.S.?
Sure. I will say that the Biden administration did take steps to curb a flow of immigration that came across the southern border. So I'd imagine the vice president would continue that in her administration as well. But I do want to get back to the bipartisan border bill that the vice president said that she would sign. Paul's right. The entire Republican Party did end up coming out against it. I just failed to say when, and that was after President Trump made the call to whip the votes against the bill. I don't think anyone would consider Oklahoma Senator James Lankford as some liberal on this issue. In fact, most people would consider him one of the most conservative members of the U.S. Senate. And that conservative member and several other conservative members, a majority that would have passed this bill and actually solved the problem, agreed on that number. And it's not a number of people flowing in illegally, it's a number of people being processed through the southern border, which you pointed to as something that the bill would do as well. It would increase judges to kind of speed up the processing, to clear the backlog. We often talk about the immigrants who came the right way. Back when my great-grandparents came, the right way was signing your name at Ellis Island and you're off on your way. If that was the right way now, we wouldn't consider these people illegal immigrants. And to the point about who's footing the bill, let's not forget it wasn't New York City that started shipping immigrants up. It was the state of Texas and the state of Florida who abdicated their responsibility as border state, a responsibility that comes with billions upon billions of dollars in federal funding that we pay for in our federal taxes to deal with that problem. And instead, they said, oh, New York will treat them like human beings, so we'll just send them up to them. We'll just round these people up in buses and send them up to New York. We didn't get a cut of that money. Where's our money from Texas? Where's the billions of dollars in federal funding that goes to these border states? No, but they don't want to solve the problem. They want to paint a picture of what Democrats are doing, and they want to paint a picture of a porous southern border when we have a northern border that doesn't get talked about a lot, and we have ports of entry in every city in America called airports that the vast majority of people who are here illegally got here in an airport. So we talk and we conflate the conversation about immigration and immigration reform and putting a pathway to citizenship on the table for the people who sustain our economy. If we go forward with mass deportations, not only will families be separated again like they were in the first Trump administration, but our national economy will crumble. If you don't like the high grocery prices now, just wait until Trump rounds up agricultural workers en masse and you can't get produce on your shelves.
Thank you. It's definitely a conversation that needs to continue. But when we come back from the break, we'll take a look at the important measures on the ballot in New York and in Massachusetts. Stay with us.
We are back with breaking news. Kamala Harris just won California, making her total electoral votes 179.
And not only are we tracking local Senate and Assembly races, but the race for Albany County District Attorney was up for grabs tonight. Democrat Lee Kinlan won against Republican nominee Ralph Ambrosio.
The district attorney's role is to work for the government in criminal cases surrounding Albany and prosecute crimes in Albany County.
We have a breaking news update on a race for the House of Representatives. Republican Elise Stefanik has won with 62.5% against Democrat Paula Collins. You may have noticed some statewide measures on the ballot today.
New York has only one statewide ballot measure. The Times-Union reported that this has been passed with 72% of the vote. The subject of Prop 1 is abortion, constitutional rights, and race and ethnicity. A vote for yes states that people cannot be denied rights based on any of these factors. If you voted in Massachusetts today, there were 5 statewide measures you could vote on.
The authorization of state auditor to audit general court initiative is on the ballot in Massachusetts. A yes vote would allow the state auditor to audit the programs, activities, and accounts of the state. Legislature and authorities it creates. A no vote would oppose this change and keep the auditor's power as they currently stand.
Also on the ballot in Massachusetts, a bid to get a competency exam repealed. Currently in Massachusetts, students have to complete a competency exam on top of normal curriculum to graduate high school. If you vote yes to repeal this, then students will no longer have to take the Massachusetts Comprehensive Assessment System exam in order to graduate.
The third Massachusetts ballot measure is about unionizing and collective bargaining for transportation drivers. A yes vote will require states to oversee unionization efforts and approve negotiated wages, benefits, and terms of work conditions.
The fourth ballot measure has to do with the legalization of psychedelic substances. If the bill is passed, residents of Massachusetts ages 21 and over will be permitted to grow, possess, and use psychedelic drugs. A yes vote would also allow the sale of psychedelic drugs for dispensaries and other trustworthy businesses.
And the last ballot measure in Massachusetts has proposed a ballot measure to raise the minimum wage of tipped workers in the state. The minimum wage for tipped workers currently stands at $6.75 an hour compared to $15 an hour for non-tipped employees. If passed, this initiative would increase the minimum wage for tipped workers gradually at the beginning of each year until it matches the state minimum wage in 2029.
When we come back, we will be hearing from our panel for the last time as they discuss today's global hot topics such as Israel, Russia, and what's at stake. We'll be right back.
Thank you for coming back with us. Over 44,000 people have been killed in the conflict in Gaza, including over 43,000 Palestinians and over 1,000 Israelis. Former President Trump has said in an interview, quote, "Get it over with and let's get back to peace and stop killing people. And that's a very simple statement," end quote. The former president labels himself as the most, quote, pro-Israel president in the nation's history, end quote. How effective will the former president be in handling in the war in Gaza? And on the other hand, Vice President Harris has been criticized by many pro-Palestinian voices for the Biden administration's handling of the conflict in Gaza. She says she'll support Israel, but also wants a ceasefire to end the war. Dr. Call, I'd like to start with you. In your professional opinion, which candidate seems to be more effective in handling the conflict?
It is almost impossible to tell in this situation because no movement has been possible in such a long time in this conflict more generally, but also since the war has broken out in Gaza specifically, we've seen the Biden administration being unable to broker any kind of deals with the Israeli government in order to stop the violence in Gaza and in surrounding areas. So it's unclear if any policies would be able to come from the United States that would actually have an impact in Israel and Gaza. We've had a very long-standing relationship with Israel, and both parties have been pretty staunchly pro-Israel for most of their history. But we see now potentially Harris moving a little bit on this. So it's unclear what we'll see coming up in the future because we haven't seen any examples of successful policies really in the region. So we don't really know what to look for at this point.
Thank you. And Paul, I'd like to hand it over to you and hear your response to that.
Well, I think without a doubt, President Trump, during his presidency, was the most pro-Israel president there was. They reached agreement with a number of the Arabic countries on the Abraham Accords. They signed peace treaties. He moved the capital and the U.S. Embassy into Jerusalem, and he was very, very supportive of Israel. I think, unfortunately, October 7th happened, and Israel is now recoiling from the biggest genocide event in their history since the Holocaust, where 1,700 people were killed by Hamas. And it's very difficult to live in proximity to people who have sworn that they want to kill you and wipe your country off the face of the map. It's really a question, Israel versus Hamas, of whoever dies last wins. The Hamas people, even the reconstituted Hamas today, which are on their fourth or fifth leader since the IDF and the Mossad have taken out all their leaders, they're still unwilling to give back hostages. They're still unwilling to negotiate a ceasefire, and they're telling their people to fight to the death. And if they are about to lose and there are hostages, to kill the hostages, as we have seen. These are not people that you can negotiate with, and they have to be eradicated. And I think a lot of this stems from direction that they are getting as they're driven by Iran, whether it's Hamas or Hezbollah or the Sufis. All their surrogate armies are pointed at Israel and the United States, the great Satan. So it's very difficult to win wars against people who say they're not afraid to die and their only mission is to kill you.
And Dan, I noticed that Paul's response struck a chord with you. I would love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I mean, the word eradicated really is troubling. And it's troubling that one party has basically said, yeah, well, U.S. policy might have said a two-state solution is best for the region, but we're just going to throw our hands up, and whoever dies last survives. I think that's very troubling language. I think when over 40,000 Palestinians have been killed, over half of which are children, I don't know how many Israeli folks are worried about the children of Palestine coming to kill them. I think by indiscriminately bombing the region, by taking actions out of proportion to horrible, horrible attacks on October 7th that both parties have strongly denounced, taking such dramatic actions that the international community has called acts of war or war crimes, a true disproportionate response. Again, the indiscriminate bombing and starvation of a population of people that, again, over half of which are children. This has been unquestioned a brutal instance of ethnic cleansing that the Israeli people have perpetrated on the people of Palestine. And again, this isn't a stance on how strong we should support the Israeli state. This is a reality of what Benjamin Netanyahu has been bringing to the Gaza Strip, not just since October 7th, but for several years as they have expanded settlements throughout the West Bank and expanded and expanded and expanded, literally creating a jail, an open-air prison that 2 million people cannot go in or out of freely. There are Palestinians that live under Israeli settlements that have to walk as Israeli settlers on their land, throw trash under and onto them. The treatment is awful. The response from the Israeli military has been incredibly out of proportion. And I don't think the United States can look at that and say, this is what it has to be, and maybe if we close our eyes a little bit and pretend like it's not happening, that this will be over quickly, as the president wants, as the former president said.
Thank you. And I'd like to shift gears a little bit and go a little ways around the world and talk about Russia. Mistrust in the elections and their results has become a topic of discussion. According to government officials, Russia is the top international threat to the U.S. election. They've tried to manipulate the election using fake websites, as well as by pushing misleading content on social media. Intelligence officials and private security analysts have concluded that Russia does support the former president. He has also praised Russian President Vladimir Putin. Dan, I'd like to ask you, is the association between the former president and the Russian president concerning?
If you stand for democracy, I think it is. Look at what's happening in Ukraine now. North Korean troops are joining the Russian military to fight Ukraine. And we have a major party candidate who very well might, when the votes are all added up, become the next president, who won't stand against Russia, North Korea, and China, but will join this axis. And the fact that we have, again, a president that has clearly admired dictators, that has spoken highly of Viktor Orban, Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un, it's very concerning, and it's not surprising why the Russian government would prefer Donald Trump when they know and they've seen that at the slightest bit of flattery, well, they pretty much have him in his pocket. And so I think there's been a lot of bluster by the Trump campaign about strong leadership, but I think all we've seen is someone who berades our allies, calls them so-called allies, tries to pull us out of long-standing peace treaties that have kept the world safe, and instead talks about being a dictator and talks about his admiration for dictators around the world.
And Paul, I would like to hear your response to Dan.
Well, I think Dan has really got the White House talking points down pretty well. Under Trump, there were no wars. He was feared. He was feared by Russia. He was feared by China. And he was feared by Kim Jong-un. And because he can pick up the phone and call these people and deal with them, that's not a bad thing. It's a good thing to be able to confer with your opposition. Otherwise, you're going to spin out into World War III, which is exactly what is happening under Biden now. His appeasement of Iran and his unwillingness to fully support Taiwan and his dragging his feet in the Ukraine by not giving the Ukrainians the weapons they needed to beat Russia and protect Europe have made Europe and Asia tinderboxes. None of that existed under Trump. And, you know, it started with loss of respect for the United States when we pulled out of Afghanistan with our tail between our legs and left hundreds of thousands of Afghans and American citizens there with the Taliban. There had not been one soldier's death in the 18 months prior to the leaving at Tehran at the airport. And that was because Trump literally threatened the Taliban that if anything happened to an American citizen, there was going to be consequences that was going to be far beyond a normal response. So people are afraid of Trump in the world. And that's not a bad thing when you have dictators. I do not believe that that Iran would have had Hezbollah or the Houthis or Hamas attack Israel if Donald Trump were president, and I don't believe that Vladimir Putin would have gone into the Ukraine.
And Dr. Call, I would like to hear your response to both of their talking points.
I do want to press back on the idea that Donald Trump sees Viktor Orban and Putin as opposition, as you stated in your statement. He definitely does not see them as the opposition in his own statements, in his own platform, in the Republican platform. He has discussed liking the approach that people like Viktor Orban and Putin have to politics. Viktor Orban is a dictator in Hungary who consolidated power under his own hands as the executive in a process known as executive aggrandizement, which is part of a global phenomenon of democratic backsliding, which is an extreme problem. And the fact that we are trying to model ourselves or to be friends with people that are also dictators and have turned democracies into not dictators is troubling, regardless of what the position is on foreign policy. I'm going to let you two go ahead and debate it out on that. But in terms of relationships with dictators, that has been something that Trump has said that he is into. He likes talking to Viktor Orban. He looks at Viktor Orban as somebody else in the region that he can look to for his position as well. They feed off of each other. And so, yes, it is part of a larger problem of democratic backsliding around the world, really.
Thank you all. And that will do it for our panel. I would like to thank you all for your insights and for taking the time to sit here with us on election night. And when we come back, Vanessa and Tiana talk about the importance of voting and a story that's close to home. Thank you.
Before we go, let's take one last look at the race for the White House.
While many states have been called, only one swing state was called. North Carolina just announced their support for Trump. Currently, Trump is leading with 230 and Harris is trailing behind with 187 after just winning Oregon. That'll do it for us at SCTV. As always, thank you so much for watching our show tonight.
If you want to rewatch this show, it will be right here on the Siena College Communications Program YouTube page. You can find it under the Live tab.
And make sure to follow us on Instagram at sienacollege.tv. We will be posting updates on the election results after the show. We will have an online exclusive interview with Don Levi, the director of Siena College Research Institute. Our Amber Fisher sat down with Don to learn more about the Research Institute and its role during election season. You can watch that right here on YouTube. And that'll do it for our election night special coverage.
Thank you to our Albany County Legislator Paul Bergdorf, Siena College Professor Dr. Sam Call, and Deputy Director at All in Action Fund Dan Mosier for being part of our panel tonight. And thank you to our producers, Katie Rogers and Tommy Kane, for producing this show. Lastly, thank you to all the production staff working hard in the control room tonight.
We'll see you next Wednesday, live at 2:30.